Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. If you've ever found yourself wondering exactly how auditors manage to distill months of chaotic financial investigation down into one single highly structured report, a report that protects millions of investors, by the way, well, you are absolutely in the right place. Today, we're going to completely decode the strict logic of the auditor's decision tree. Let's get right into it.
So, here's our game plan. We'll be progressing through 5 core phases: modified opinions and materiality, emphasis of matter, other matter paragraphs, the absolutely critical going concern assessment, and finally, we'll wrap it all up with a summary of audit reporting.
All right, kicking things off with Section 1, Modified Opinions and Materiality. Now, an auditor's report isn't just some simple pass or fail grade. There's actually a highly structured gradient involved. Whenever an auditor hits a hurdle, they have to classify it precisely. Basically, is it a misstatement, like, say, a company applying totally incorrect accounting policies? Or is it a scope limitation? This is where the auditor is essentially a detective locked out of the crime scene. It happens when management actively blocks access to vital evidence, like, preventing them from doing inventory counts. But before even touching the actual opinion, the auditor has to judge the severity of the issue, and they do this across 3 tiers: immaterial, material, and then the ultimate red flag, pervasive. Honestly, you're going to want to lock that word into your memory. A pervasive issue is not just confined to one little line item. It infects such a massive portion of the financials that it literally destroys the user's understanding of the entire company.
So, how do we actually quantify these thresholds in the real world? Well, as a general academic benchmark, a misstatement that impacts just 5% of profit is often the tipping point. That's the line where an issue crosses from immaterial over to material. Once it hits that line, it officially has the power to manipulate the decisions of the investors reading the report.
If we map this out, you can really see the strict logic at play. An immaterial issue, the opinion remains unmodified. Simple. But cross into materiality and a misstatement yields a qualified or an except for opinion. Now, if that issue becomes both material and pervasive, it triggers a severe adverse opinion. The financials are essentially toxic at that point. On the flip side, a pervasive scope limitation means the auditor is flying totally blind to massive chunks of data. And the result? A disclaimer. They basically just walk away saying, listen, I can't even form an opinion here.
Moving right along to Section 2, Emphasis of Matter, or EOM for short.
Okay, so once the core opinion is locked in, an auditor might still need to communicate a bit more context. That's where the emphasis of matter paragraph comes in. It's used to draw the user's attention to a matter that's already disclosed in the financial statements. The key here is that it doesn't modify the audit opinion at all. Instead, think of it acting like a bright yellow highlighter for critical information that management has already written in the notes. You are usually going to see EOM paragraphs deployed in highly specific, super high-stakes scenarios. We're talking about things like exceptional regulatory litigation, the aftermath of a major disaster that wreaks havoc on the entity's financial position, or maybe a really significant subsequent event. It's also used for major technical shifts, like if a company early adopts a new accounting standard. In all of these cases, the auditor is essentially grabbing the reader by the shoulders and saying, look, my opinion is totally clean, but you really, really need to go read Note X to understand what this company is currently facing. And that brings us to Section 3, Other Matter, or OM, paragraphs. Now, what if the auditor needs to communicate something that is completely outside the bounds of the financial statements? This is a critical distinction to master. While the emphasis of matter points inward to things already in the financials, the Other Matter paragraph points outward. It relates to undisclosed matters that are highly relevant to understanding the audit process itself. Probably the most common real-world application of an OM paragraph happens when the prior year's financial statements were handled by a completely different auditor. Or hey, maybe they weren't even audited at all. The current auditor uses the OM paragraph to set the record straight, saying, hey, I'm taking responsibility for this current year, but last year's numbers, those are signed off by someone else on this specific date. You'll also see it used if there's a legal restriction on who is actually allowed to read the report. Up next, Section 4, the Going Concern Assessment. All right, now we reach what is arguably the most existential evaluation an auditor performs. This is where we transcend the simple numbers on a page and look at the entity's actual survival. The entire foundation of standard reporting relies completely on the going concern assumption, which is simply the belief that the company isn't going to liquidate. If this assumption breaks down, well, standard accounting rules go right out the window, and everything has to be prepared on a liquidation basis instead. And there's a really strict temporal boundary for this assessment: 12 months. The auditor must ensure that management's assessment of the company's ability to survive covers a minimum of 1 full year from the reporting date. Not 11 months, not just until the end of the current calendar year. It has to be a full 12 months minimum.
To properly evaluate this, the auditor definitely doesn't just guess. They follow a rigorous step-by-step risk assessment. First up, did management actually perform an assessment? Like, did they do the homework? Second, does it cover that vital 12-month window we just talked about? And third, if it doesn't even exist, the auditor must aggressively interrogate management to find out what exactly gives them the confidence to claim they're going to survive the year.
Throughout this entire process, the auditor is actively hunting for red flags. They're basically looking for the financial Grim Reaper. These flags usually fall into 3 main buckets. You have financial indicators, like continuous bleeding operating losses. You have operating indicators, like maybe a primary supplier suddenly vanishing. Or you have external indicators, like an uninsured natural disaster or some massive looming pending litigation. If significant doubt does exist, the auditor's reaction depends entirely on management's transparency. If survival is genuinely uncertain, but management is open and adequately discloses this, the auditor still gives an unmodified opinion, but they tack on a very specific material uncertainty related to going concern paragraph. But, and this is a big but, if management tries to sweep the issue under the rug, the auditor is forced to throw the book at them with either a qualified or an adverse opinion. You really need to take note of this worst-case scenario. If management flat out refuses to provide evidence regarding their survival or refuses to extend their assessment, the auditor has to treat this as a pervasive scope limitation. I mean, you can't verify the very foundation of the business, right? This scenario almost guarantees a disclaimer of opinion.
Finally, let's wrap this up with Section 5, Summary of Audit Reporting.
Let's synthesize this whole highly technical framework into an ultimate cheat sheet. A pervasive misstatement that forces an adverse opinion. A pervasive scope limitation forces a disclaimer. A fundamental disclosed matter triggers an EOM. An undisclosed audit matter requires an OM. And an adequately disclosed going concern uncertainty results in a clean opinion, but with a dedicated warning paragraph. Everything has its specific place. So as you process this decision matrix, I want to leave you with one final, provocative challenge to really test your grasp of the material. Imagine a situation where a pervasive lack of evidence regarding a company's inventory collides directly with a hidden, unrecorded threat of imminent bankruptcy. How exactly does the auditor prioritize those warning bells? Does the lack of evidence prevent them from calling out the bankruptcy risk? Or does that existential threat just completely override the scope limitation? Think deeply about how these frameworks ultimately protect the public interest. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and as always,